A few years back, before the DC Universe switched its shows over to HBO, when the Titan series was in its first 2 seasons, and these shows were still good, something incredible happened. There was a flashback with Donna Troy and Dick Grayson when they had met up with one another in Titans to a time when they were teenage sidekicks in Wayne Manor in a separate room because they weren't in the big room at the big table with the adults when the Justice League was doing official business. The beauty of this, and the reason I say it was so incredible, was that it took place in a sort of vague time frame. That's to say, it clearly didn't fit with the timing of the Tim Burton Batman franchise, the Dark Knight trilogy franchise. It wasn't Batfleck. This was before Titans did finally give us a Bruce Wayne Batman later, after the show had tanked and was not as good anymore. But it didn't matter. It gave you this occurrence in a way that it could have been set during the Super Friends cartoon. It could have been at any point in any of the franchises, the 60s Batman. You just didn't even know, and it didn't matter. The architecture of Wayne Manor being so vintage and classic, that feel of everything was slightly campy, and in that moment, it could have been anywhere, anytime, any version of the DC Universe before or after the Crisis on Infinite Earths, etc. And yes, it may feel non sequitur sitting next to my Marvel thing for this, but I just felt like I wanted to sit down for this one. So I bring this up because this is a problem. Canon in intellectual properties is huge. And of course, nerds know this. I've taken issue many times with the new Star Treks, the new Star Wars. They just continually butcher canon. Star Wars is now busy. Disney is inventing retroactively things to justify their Star Cruiser hotel and writing them into the mythology after they built the hotel thing just to make money. Star Trek keeps changing up the details, Star Trek in quotes, keeps changing up the details of the Star Trek universe willy-nilly. When it comes to superheroes, we knew that the Marvel universe, the cinematic universe, was different. It was a reboot. You're not picking up the story with comic books where they were. Of course, you weren't doing that within comic books because so much time has passed. Being a child of the 80s, I remember when the characters would have memories and flashbacks. They talk about what they did in the 60s and before, some of them, because I was still reading that generation. And now since then, they've had to keep changing it to update it. Now, DC Comics, infamously, famously, had such a convoluted continuity and many different universes in the multiverse before Marvel did, that they concocted the Crisis on Infinite Earth, which became this phenomenal comic book event, in order to drive it back down to one. Got them a ton of attention, and it did a good job of straightening out some issues, which they more or less kind of frittered away later, because there became this renewed interest in the multiverse as it went on. By the time they did it in their Arrowverse on CW, you're like, guys, you did this to fix your problems 40 years ago almost, and now you have to do it again. Well, they wanted to do it again because that was the whole point. They were reliving that experience. But as a result of all of these different franchises we've seen on TV and in movies, I think they have an opportunity to do something a little bit more vague with their canon, like the Donna Troy, Dick Grayson thing. It felt extremely authentic, and it didn't matter which version of the Bat family within the multiverse you were putting that in your mind. You were able to get flashback like that to something substantive. And I think it comes through in the Joker movie with how retro the theater is, where the Wayne family is at the theater, when you consider that the original Batman, his parents must have been killed in the late 20s in order for him to be Batman when he comes out later. Late 20s at the latest, actually, trying to calculate his age off the top of my head. So they did a good job in Joker of giving you that retro feel of something that actually looked more like the original comic book 80 years ago. Has it been that long? That looked like the real original comic book in the ballpark of 80 years ago, and did it without affecting anything. They didn't try to set it in the past. They didn't try to give you a time travel sequence. They just gave you a place where the ambiance was like that. And throughout the Joker, we get a sense of, very often, vague time, in the sense that you'll get styles of dress, styles of music, things that you see in the background, architecture, that it does not make it feel like, oh yes, this is definitely set today or definitely set 50 years ago. It's really not clear. It captures the whole aesthetic of the whole age of comic books without being too specific. So there's this fine line with, if you're going to completely swap out a comic book character, superhero's race, their gender, their origin story, their sex preference, all of that stuff, willy-nilly and artificially, that just doesn't work. And that, of course, ends up getting rejected. But there is this wide open field to modify things as long as they have that authenticity to the overall message of the character. I was thinking of this because yesterday I rewatched the Dawn of Justice, Superman versus Batman. And once again, I love that movie. Justice League was a terrible script. Man of Steel was a terrible script. There's so much good stuff in Batman versus Superman, but it is missing things, obviously. I think the biggest thing that it misses out on, and it could have benefited from this idea of vague canon, it misses out on having the depth of emotional connection that it ought to have. Ben Affleck surprised me. I think I'd have to pick him as my favorite Batman so far, oddly enough. Not what I expected when I heard he was playing him. He's perfect in that role as the aging Bruce Wayne Batman. I thought he really nailed it. And because they give you references in the movie, too, to the wind-up exploding penguins. There's evidence in the aesthetic. What's left of dilapidated Wayne Manor looks suspiciously like what happened to Wayne Manor back during when Val Kilmer was Batman. There's sort of a sense there that you're tying in. He is the Dark Knight Batman, and he is the Tim Burton Batman. He is all the Batman, except the campy 60s Batman would be a stretch. He just is those Batmen as the Batman. And that worked out, but they dropped the ball with Superman. Brandon Routh never got enough credit for being Superman, and I really liked his Superman. Obviously, you can't pass on Henry Cavill. Cavill is just perfect for that role. But what they did by bringing Brandon Routh, having him do the dual role in the Arrowverse version of Crisis on Infinite Earths, having him be Batman, Kingdom Come Superman in the future, no less, and tying that in clearly with the Christopher Reeve Superman, that's what we needed Henry Cavill to be. Man of Steel, if you were going to make a Superman movie as a setup for Batman versus Superman, and that's probably a good idea, you could have made a movie and called it Man of Steel and starred Henry Cavill and Amy Adams, but have their child in it that was in the Brandon Routh one. Have it be the Superman that's been around since Christopher Reeve. And not try to recycle this dark grittiness of the Dark Knight trilogy, which doesn't really work for Superman ever. And let it be a happy, optimistic, typically Superman movie. And had it be have a cameo in there of Ben Affleck as the older Batman. And I think by the time you get to Batman versus Superman, you have a sense then that they've known each other for a while, they've coexisted in this universe, but now things have gone haywire. But you have to completely change the Man of Steel to get there. And then you can begin to capture what it felt like in the comic book for these men to turn on one another, for this to happen because of their obvious inherently different ideas of their idea of what a perfect universe would be, or the libertarian view of entropy as natural that Batman has versus Superman sort of symbolizing the great authoritarian state that's the good guy, though, and always gets it right somehow, some way. Because that's the other chief problem of a lot of the fiction now. When Spock died and Kirk was there and they say farewell in the Wrath of Khan, it's a heart-tearing, rending moment because you've known those guys for 20 years, since the 60s. You've known their relationship. They've had adventures together. When they did Star Trek Into Darkness and tried to copy it, it completely was messed up and didn't work because those guys had just met each other. You put it in this story all awkward. And this is what happened with Batman versus Superman. Even though Ben Affleck did such a good job of feeling like classic Batman, we literally had just met Superman. In this version of the universe, Superman arrived one movie ago, became publicly known, followed by General Zod, caused all that mayhem and destruction. He fights them. They don't know what to think about Superman. It didn't translate well to the next movie where you're supposed to have this clash of the pessimism versus the optimism and the reaction of people globally to the death of Superman at the end. That was just beautifully portrayed in every way except the buildup. Like, why did they care so much? The only reason it was so emotional is it was well depicted, and we all loved Superman from the comics. And so we had attachment to it. But literally, this alien just came out of the woodwork. You just found out about him a movie ago. You're not sure what to make about him. What has he done in the meantime? Without more time go by and 100 other times he saved the world, you just don't, it just doesn't work. And they would have been better off, I think, all the way around with that story. Give us a Superman movie, then give us Batman versus Superman, and use this vague canon idea. It didn't have to be the first time they met Wonder Woman. We get the reference in the, within the story that she disappeared for 100 years. It could have been less than that. You could have had the news reports on that say, a woman that appears to be Wonder Woman, who hasn't been heard from in 40 years. You could have had some sort of reunion of her with Superman, with Batman, in a way that made it seem like she might be the TV Wonder Woman. There was no reason why Barry Allen had to be completely unknown to them, or Cyborg, or Aquaman. When they uncovered Luthor's records, it could have been like, Batman could have been like, we haven't seen them in a while, but Luthor knows about Arthur and about Barry and about Cyborg. Why am I blanking on his name? There could have then been a vague sense that they knew each other before, maybe had worked together before. It puts it in more of a sync instead of, hey, we just rounded up these people we never met before, but we're going to fight to the death now. And we got to resurrect this alien. He's the guy that gave us hope, even though we just met him last week. Well, okay, a year ago or 18 months ago. None of it ended up having the feel that it should have by the time you get through to Justice League, which that whole script needed to be redone. But it could have felt that way. You could have done that by giving us just enough to let us use our own imagination to wonder how it pieced together. You don't have to tell us everything, but you've got to keep the basics of the characters consistent with who they are, what they stand for, and what we already know about them and their origin.